What's up, everyone? Tara Roberts here with Bleacher Report. Today, we are talking fantasy stars that we need to worry about now that we are heading into week 3. I hope that week 2 treated you well. We got some bounce backs from a lot of players, yay, but there are still some red flags being raised here that we got to talk about, right? As always, jump into the comments. Let me know your thoughts. If you've got any questions, put them in there because there's a lot going on here. We've got players that didn't bounce back. We've got injury news coming in. Keep your alerts on because it's crazy out here. But let's go ahead and start off because we got a lot to cover here. We got like 8, 9, 10. I don't know. There's a lot of players here. We're going to start things off here at number 1. We're counting down here, going from number 1 with Terry McLaurin as our first guy that we need to worry about here. We thought we would start you off with as much panic as you can humanly contain right now. Good news, though. Hey, good news. Terry McLaurin got 9 targets, so that is a big improvement on week 1, right? Doubling the targets. Yay, we like to see that. Bad news, he caught 5 of those targets for 48 yards. That's not so good there, unfortunately. The fantasy points are not coming through here for Terry. Now, here is a little caveat, good news. He got off to a very similar start last season. When I say similar, I'm talking like identical stats nearly in the first 2 games here. So it is what it is. Sometimes he's a big play receiver. Unfortunately, he doesn't get a lot of volume for that floor that you would like from a wide receiver 1. That's why he was being drafted as a low-end wide receiver 2 versus guys that command more reliable volume here. But the reason that we are concerned about Terry McLaurin over some other guys that we'll get to here in a second is because when we're looking at Terry McLaurin, a lot of other guys, they're not dealing with offensive changes. Like if you think about a Nico Collins, who's not on the list because we haven't seen him right now, a Nico Collins, right? There's not a bunch of changes going on in his offense, right? No new quarterback situation, no big additional wide receivers he has to worry about, right? Just rookies, and doesn't really have to contend with them or compete with them. But for Terry McLaurin, the problem is that we got Deebo Samuel that came in my assessment in preseason, that this was a great addition for the Commanders because Deebo and Terry McLaurin could play very well off of each other. Very nice complement, very different skill set, right? And that Deebo coming in there would maybe take some of that volume that we were getting from Zach Ertz. He was kind of operating as the de facto wide receiver 2 last season because they didn't actually have a strong wide receiver 2. Unfortunately, Ertz hasn't gone away. Ertz has had 13 targets and 2 touchdowns through the first 2 games. So when you got Deebo Samuel over here that is taking volume from a completely new perspective, you've got Zach Ertz that's got the same volume that he had before. Unfortunately, this might actually be directly affecting Terry McLaurin. Now, we're not benching Terry McLaurin or anything like that unless you're in a more shallow league. But we do have to be concerned here because we've got these shifts in offense, and this is something that we absolutely have to worry about here. Moving on to number 2 here, we got AJ Brown here. Good news for him. He doesn't have anybody new that he has to contend with, unlike Terry McLaurin. Bad news is that this offense is looking very similar to 2024 in the way that we saw the decrease in volume from AJ Brown, but maybe even more so. The lack of pass volume for the Eagles is very concerning here. We have not had a passing touchdown from Jalen Hurts this year. That's a problem, right? He threw for 152 yards in week 1. And we could excuse it like, oh, well, maybe the secondary for Dallas. That's their strength versus the run, right? So they focused on Saquon. Okay, cool. Kansas City, though, here's where the problem arrives. That should be a very advantageous attack through the air situation. But Philadelphia pushed aggressively on the ground with Saquon. Jalen Hurts threw for just 101 yards, 15 completions. There is no way that anybody as a pass catcher can thrive when that type of volume is happening, unfortunately. So we can't throw another little caveat in here, right? When we're looking at AJ Brown and you see his statistics and you compare them to Devon Vele, Michael Wilson, Ben Skoranek, Mac Hollins, that's not a list that we want our superstar on, right? Now, we will give him one little excuse here. This is a team that this is essentially a rematch game from the Super Bowl, right? It's possible that Kansas City just decided they beat us through the air last time. Devontae Smith and AJ Brown both had touchdowns. Maybe they wanted to attack it from the perspective of, we're just not going to let that happen again. So we're going to shut them down. And the result was Saquon getting the volume. Maybe that happened. But regardless, we need to be concerned because it looks like those same concerns that we had last year about lack of pass volume with Saquon being in the offense now is becoming a major issue here. All right, let me jump to the chat here real quick from D-Talk. Houston having damn near an entire new offensive line isn't much of a change. Thoughts on CJ Stroud? That is much of a change, but not in the sense that the offensive line is bad and it was bad last year. So it's the same thing that they got to contend with. They just didn't solve the problem that they had, unfortunately. So when we're looking at CJ Stroud and Nico Collins, good thing for him is that there's a target funnel there. When we saw last week, and of course, rookies can develop as the season goes on. And then at some point, we should have Christian Kirk back as well from that hamstring injury. But at the same time, there is a very clear target funnel that should go directly to Nico Collins. So overall, he's someone that we should be worried about, but not massively panicked until we see this game that's going to happen right here. Now, CJ Stroud, that's another thing. But I don't include CJ Stroud because, quite frankly, in my original ranking, CJ Stroud was kind of way back at like 20 something. So, yeah, with no offensive line, Stroud can't be productive from a fantasy perspective. So, yes, Lyndon, I like this question. You're worried about Breece Hall. Can he pick it up? I'm actually not too worried about Breece Hall. I think he's a good buy low candidate here. Now, this game was bad. Buffalo's defense, we did maybe expect that they were going to have strong production on the ground just because of what happened with Derrick Henry the week before. Now we got to remember that Derrick Henry is a different anomaly and they attack offensively in a very different manner, right? So we can't really make a direct correlation of saying that Breece Hall should have tore it up in the same exact way that Derrick Henry did the week before. It was a bad game. But week one was very encouraging, right? And when we look at a good takeaway from this game, the good takeaway here is that Braylon Allen was kind of non-existent. Breece Hall is the clear RB1. Those concerns that we had in terms of there being a flip, it looks like Braylon Allen has to compete more with Isaiah Davis than anybody else in terms of volume there. So Breece as an RB1 is safe there. It was just a bad game here. Moving on to number 3 here. Our number 3 here is Brian Thomas Jr. He's still the wide receiver 1. We'll start off the good here. I'm liking this trend. We'll start with the good. He's still the wide receiver 1. Travis Hunter is not a major threat here. That was a little bit of a concern heading in there, but snaps, routes, targets, it's all very clear that Brian Thomas is the high volume recipient. The problem is that he's not doing anything with those targets. It's a massive issue. It wouldn't be an issue if we had some kind of promise of, hey, it's a defense clamping him down or something like that. But this was a fantastic matchup where he should have absolutely beat up on that Cincinnati secondary, and it didn't happen. Massive targets in this game, 12. Inability to take advantage of it. And we can say, hey, Trevor Lawrence, Brian Thomas Jr., the chemistry isn't there. That's a major concern. But when you add in the caveat that Brian Thomas Jr. just looks flat out off, dropping passes, that's a major concern there. But Liam Cohen, maybe an hour or two ago, said that Brian Thomas Jr. entered Sunday's game with a wrist injury, which I find funny because that was not on the injury report there. So, shame on you, Jacksonville, for not sharing that with us. But if that is actually legit and he did have a wrist injury that he was dealing with, then that does kind of explain the fact that he was dropping passes directly in his hands, right? So that gives us a little bit something that we can pivot from and hope. But still, this doesn't seem like the same guy that we saw last year. And we're getting kind of worried here that this combination of him and Trevor Lawrence, the connection, we never saw it before. That was Mac Jones that really carried Brian Thomas Jr. to the glory land at the end of last season here. So there's stuff that we still have to work on here, concerns that we have. But again, he is the wide receiver 1 of this offense. The volume is there. He's just got to make something of it. Moving on to number 4 here. This one is something I am very concerned with. It's James Conner. James Conner, is he the RB1 here? Technically speaking, right now, yeah, but shades on the horizon is that this is straight up a committee. When we're looking at snap counts and routes run and targets and carries, let's break it down. James Conner this weekend played 30 snaps. Trey Benson played 25. That's fairly even. Conner ran 12 routes. Benson ran 16. Oops. Conner had 1 target. Benson had 5 targets. Now the carries still favored James Conner, 11-3, but that kind of split is not ideal from a fantasy perspective. If you guys remember, we did an overrated and underrated ADP show back in August. We talked about James Conner. The verdict for me was that he was overrated for his ADP. I did get a little bit of pushback on that because Conner has been someone that has always paid off at his ADP, always. So what was the concern, right? Well, the concern is that they had been very vocal about the fact in Arizona that they were going to try and get more touches to Trey Benson. They said it. We just needed to believe it. And right off the bat here, we are seeing that they were not lying. They want those additional touches here. I worry that James Conner's age kind of slipped up on us here, and kind of concerned here that we've got him in what should have been an ideal matchup. I'm still holding on hope. I could excuse week 1, but we've got an ideal matchup here in week 2 against a Carolina run defense that is legitimately terrible and should have been torn up, and that did not happen. That is a massive concern here. We're worried about James Conner, unfortunately. Moving on to the chats here. From user INT, how about Cortland Sutton? Traded Tyreek for him. Is he okay? I feel like Tyreek and Sutton, very, very similar in terms of value. So ultimately, I kind of think you made the right move here for this week. The result wasn't fantastic, but ultimately there's just more volatility in that Miami offense for you. Sutton, it seems like it was just a day where he was clamped down on defense. And because they have so many emerging wide receivers, they opted to, and Bo Nix opted to, from a game plan, opted to go away from targeting that tougher coverage on Cortland Sutton and targeting Troy Franklin. We knew someone was going to emerge, and Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims were kind of two of those primary candidates there. So he's clearly separating himself. I don't think that he is stepping into the wide receiver 1 role over Cortland Sutton. So I wouldn't panic here. This might just been one of those weird matchups here. We do have to remember that Indianapolis's defense, while it was dealing with a couple of key injuries, they have clearly improved in terms of their secondary as well this season. So we're not massively panicked over him. Cortland is still a solid wide receiver 2 for us. From Hot Mic User, should I trade Justin Herbert for Jordan Mason? I have Mayfield, but I could use another running back. Oh, man. And it's tough because we haven't seen Herbert yet in this second week, and that would be kind of our delineating factor there. Because my gut tells me I actually started Herbert over Baker Mayfield in a league, so we'll see how that plays out. But my gut tells me that ultimately, in terms of longevity, the higher upside play, just based off how sharp Justin Herbert was looking in week 1 and how much pass volume they did push, might be the ultimate play. But I think you've got the right idea. Trade one of these guys for a running back, and I like Jordan Mason as a target here because a lot of times trade values for quarterbacks can be a little shaky, and I think Mason is a good sneaky one to get in on. So I approve of that trade for sure. Moving on to number 5 here of guys that we got to panic about. Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley has a problem, and the problem is not Calvin Ridley. The problem is named Alec Ayermaner. And it's just the beginning of the season, and right off the bat, our rookie here is literally getting an equal target share here. When you're able to do that immediately, that's a cause for concern here. We talked about Calvin Ridley's performance in week 1 being bad and not to panic over it because we expected it to be a bad performance, right? It was against Denver. He was going to get locked down. You don't panic over that. Poor performances against Denver. It is what it is. And to be fair, we should not panic over his performance in week 2 because this is another difficult defense as well. But the problem here is that if this volume for Alec Ayermaner is going to be sustained, Cam Ward is going to have to throw more. And so we might get into a muddied situation where we've got 2 viable fantasy options. We've got 2 strong receivers, and we don't have Cam Ward throwing enough volume here. So as the season progresses, maybe things shape out good. But right now, we are getting a little panicked because the reason that we liked Calvin Ridley was because despite the fact that this was our, a bad team that was going to be working through problems with their new rookie quarterback, we liked Calvin Ridley because there was going to be an aggressive target share to him. Alec Ayermaner's existence kind of puts that as a major issue here. So unfortunately, we are a little bit concerned about that one, right? We'll play it by ear, but Cam Ward has got to push more pass volume if both of these receivers are going to be getting an equal target share here and touchdowns. They got to come. They got to come. Moving on to our next here at number 6, it is DJ Moore. Now, good news here. There is no underlying threat to DJ Moore's role completely disappearing here. The 2 wide receiver sets aggressively favor Rome Odunze and DJ Moore. The problem is that DJ Moore is no longer the wide receiver 1 here, unfortunately. Yeah, the problem is that when heading into the season, there were a lot of concerns around this Chicago pass catchers group because we truly did not know the pecking order and it could very easily flip, right? I really wanted no piece of the Chicago pass catchers because I thought DJ Moore's ADP was a little too elevated and Rome Odunze's was a good bargain for what he could be. A lot of us were saying, this could be his JSN type season where he ascends and takes over as the wide receiver one in an offense. And 2 weeks in, that is exactly what is happening here. The target share, snaps, routes, and everything are things we like to look at. Target share is the major issue here. Rome Odunze has dominated in target share in the Chicago offense, over 25% in week one, over 30% in week two. DJ Moore's target share has dipped below 20%. It is early in the season, but if this is truly just Rome Odunze ascending to the wide receiver one in this offense, we're looking at a DJ Moore that is going to have a cap ceiling here. Now, some good news, kind of, is that we do think that the Chicago team is going to have to push volume because as it's shaping up here, it's still looking like they've got a lot to work through here. So we're going to keep pushing forward with DJ Moore. If you want to put out your trade feelers for that, do so because I do think that this pecking order has flipped here and that Rome is the wide receiver one there. All right, moving on to number 7 here. Number 7 is Ramondre, or I'm sorry, actually, wow, that was a little Freudian slip there. It's not Ramondre Stevenson, it's Travion Henderson, and his problem is Ramondre Stevenson. Yeah, Travion Henderson. Let's again, like snaps, let's look at them. In week two, Henderson had just 19 snaps in week two compared to 39 for Ramondre Stevenson. Antonio Gibson, 11 snaps here. Unfortunately, target volume, which is where we were hoping we would see a good uptick here for Ramondre Stevenson, that is still a good uptick here for Travion Henderson. That is unfortunately still sticking there with Ramondre Stevenson because he has those 3 down back capabilities. So again, we knew this was going to be a committee. It is a committee, and unfortunately, it's a messy committee, and it is not favoring Travion Henderson in any way, shape, or form. And we are panicking because while he is very talented, the problem is that we've got years and years and years of worth of evidence of Josh McDaniels, the offensive coordinator, who in fact likes committees. Unfortunately. So he's going to have to earn his way. He's going to have to work and gain additional snaps and targets and carries, and it's just something that we don't want to mess with now, unfortunately. Before I go on to the next player here, I am going to jump to the chat here. You see those fantasy points there for Travion Henderson. And it's going, with the exception of Tony Pollard, it's going there with a lot of guys that are kind of shaping up in those underwhelming roles, right? Going to the chat here from Buds Miggy. I have McBride and Kraft. Should I trade one for a top RB? 100%. Yeah. When you look at that Green Bay wide receiver core, the one that has the most upside is not actually the wide receiver. It's Tucker Kraft. I think he is the de facto wide receiver one, especially with Jaden Reed down there with the injury, of course. Another chat there from AT Lean 498. Should I trade Jamar? My running backs are Kyron, Travion Henderson. Henderson scares me. Yeah, I think you should do that. And it sucks because, yeah, we're at a point here with Jamar Chase where he's not at his high. But at the end of the day, he is still Jamar Chase. So I'm not advocating for us to bail out on Jamar Chase, but your running backs are a concern there. If you can upgrade, that would be an excellent route there. And from Chill 79 chat, would you trade Kenneth Walker, Garrett Wilson, JSN for Tyreek Hill, Zay Flowers, DeAndre Swift? You already have CMC, Jonathan Taylor, T. Higgins, Rashee Rice. I like the left side of that. My favorite side of that trade is the Kenneth Walker, Garrett Wilson, JSN trade. It dwarfs that Tyreek Hill, Zay Flowers, DeAndre Swift side by a lot. Actually, be concerned about DeAndre Swift. He is not on this list, but we have gotten word, and we did kind of see this week, that we were seeing increased touches for Kyle Monangai. That happened. So then that offense is kind of going sideways. Just be aware that DeAndre Swift's role might be a little bit more in flux than we would like to see. Moving on to my next player, number 8 here. It is J.K. Dobbins, or I did it again. It is R.J. Harvey. I did it again where I spoiled why the person is a major issue there. It's R.J. Harvey. J.K. Dobbins is the major issue here. He's just the RB1 in that offense, unfortunately. Now, granted, it's a weird situation where we're not seeing a massive disparity in terms of snaps. But the usage for Dobbins is very specific, where he is getting 27 snaps and RJ Harvey got 19 snaps last week. That's not a massive gap. But when the touches, there's such a disparity between them. Dobbins is the guy who is just being more efficient. And when he's on the field, they're utilizing him as the lead back there. Add on to that, we've got Sean Payton throwing in Tyler Bidet unnecessarily, unfortunately. Excuse me, guys. It's just coming into a weird situation where this backfield is muddied, and we kind of knew that, right? This shouldn't be massively surprising. We knew that Dobbins was kind of viewed as the lead back, and ultimately Harvey, we were hoping would have extreme receiving upside that would carry him alongside of J.K. Dobbins. We have visions of how Sean Payton's offense looked in New Orleans, and we're not getting to that vision. I'm starting to think, like, did it actually happen, or did we imagine all of that? There's a role here that Harvey can actually, carve out. But again, we kind of talked about this earlier when we got a question about Courtland Sutton. You kind of wonder if the pass volume is going to come back down from the running backs a little bit, because a lot of those young receivers in Denver are contributing significantly. Troy Franklin emerged. We already saw Marvin Mims emerge. Pat Bryant looked good. So it's possible they've got enough here that they don't have to aggressively rely on pushing RJ Harvey early in terms of helping him develop in his pass protection and really earning that trust within the offense. So at this point, Harvey is not a guy that we can trust, unfortunately. I'm going to move on to our number 9 here, because I want to talk about this really massive subject to close things out here, and then we'll jump into the chat here. Let's talk about the Bengals. The Bengals offense is our number 9 here. How are they affected by the Joe Burrow injury? Out for what we will, have to assume here. We got the 3 months minimum timeline. We can do the math here and say probably our fantasy season is going to be without Joe Burrow, unfortunately. How does it affect these players, though? Let's start off with Ja'Marr Chase here. Chase is the wide receiver 1 that has the greatest chance of being able to weather the storm here. Now, we did get the question there about, should you trade Ja'Marr Chase if you have positions of need and you are struggling and you want to try and capitalize on his value and not have to deal with potential volatility? 100%. That's okay to do there. He's the wide receiver 1. He's going to have the highest target share in that offense. That should not change. Cincinnati's defense is a massive problem here. So the Bengals are going to have to push high volume, and they've shown that they're not scared to push high volume with Jake Browning, because they simply don't have an offensive scheme that can pivot to, or really personnel that can pivot to, a run-heavy approach. So expect volume to continue here. Just expect some inconsistency here. Jake Browning is not Joe Burrow. There's going to be ups and downs here. He will be a fantasy superstar 1 week, Ja'Marr Chase will, and then the next week he might have 8 points. Don't panic, though, but the upcoming schedule is rough. Minnesota, Denver, Detroit, Green Bay, before we get to some relief there with a matchup like Pittsburgh, who oddly enough looks awful on defense randomly now. But just be aware, there is going to be volatility. T. Higgins, same deal with Chase. Naturally, there will be some increased volatility with him. He is still a flex play at minimum here and could potentially benefit in some of these matchups here, like let's say a little matchup with Denver there, where we get Ja'Marr Chase clamped down by a Patrick Surtain. Maybe a little bit more volume can sneak out towards T. Higgins there. And then Chase Brown as well is the one that we have to be concerned about. Obviously, I am concerned for Chase Brown, probably a little bit more than I am for the wide receivers, because pass volumes should still go to the wide receivers. But the problem is that the Bengals offensive line looks legitimately awful, right? Yet again, surprise, surprise there. Brown is literally the only back getting carries. So that's awesome. And I don't see that changing, but he hasn't been able to be productive with those rush yards. He's had less than 50% of yards in each of the first two games. We need him to be thriving from a receiving perspective. And my concern here is that Browning might not actually check down a significant amount. It seems like he's hyper focused in on targeting those big superstars. And if he's not checking down to Chase Brown, then we're going to see this kind of like minimum floor play that we get constantly for Chase Brown, where he's getting 10, 11, 12, 13 fantasy points, but he can't reach that 20 plus ceiling because he needs to be getting 6, 7 receptions and a touchdown opportunity there because those opportunities might not come at the goal line, right? I did want to say one more thing on this before I go to the chats. I do want you to be cautious at looking at that 2023 little small sample size that we have of Jake Browning with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Joe Mixon at that time. Remember that Jamar Chase got injured, so technically you can't pull those stats as a whole. He missed like 1.5 games there. Higgins saw a massive uptick in volume when he was injured. And then Mixon did very well on the ground, but Mixon and Chase are not the same back, right? So Chase Brown's production does have to rely on the air game a little bit more than Joe Mixon there. Let's move to the chat here. Tangent here on the topic that we were on from RT 3693. Chase Brown, do I trade him? If you can. And it's tough when we're trying to trade these Bengals right off the bat because you might not get the value that you want. And if you drafted Chase Brown, he is in fact your RB1, right? So depending on how, like maybe you drafted a Javonte Williams and you're feeling good about him, right? Because he's got that bulk of the workload and you've made it work and you've hit well on your later picks or your mid-round picks and you can trade him for sure. But I would make sure that you're getting fair value out of him. From JLex851, who would you drop, Ridley or Harvey? I got to be honest there. If I'm looking at kind of positional value and ultimately ceiling, I'm scared to drop RJ Harvey. And I should have mentioned this when we were talking about RJ Harvey. If you're going to have to drop one, I would drop Ridley. The reason that RJ Harvey is not a drop candidate for me is that we have way too much of a very legitimate injury history with J.K. Dobbins. So you have to hold in here. There's probably more concern for Travion Henderson, right? Because they're probably going to coexist in a committee for the remainder of the season. Here with Dobbins, there more than likely is going to be a point at which RJ Harvey is going to be the de facto RB1 because of some kind of injury. So for that reason, dropping Harvey is just way too much of a risk there. So I would keep him. Just hold for right now, but you can't start him. We cannot start him right now. Just to recap things before we close things out. We had Terry McLaurin that we were concerned about, obviously, the changes in that offense with the addition of Deebo Samuel, A.J. Brown, concerns around the lack of pass volume for the Eagles. Brian Thomas Jr. just looking out of sync there. Maybe potentially injured, according to Liam Coleman, the wrist. That's something to pay attention for us. James Conner there dealing with Trey Benson taking carries and volume and targets. Calvin Ridley there, not a lot of volume in that pass offense. Elikier Maynor uptick in volume, maybe concern there for us. DJ Moore, no longer the wide receiver one there. Rome Odunze is thriving. Travion Henderson stuck in that dreadful Josh McDaniels committee. He is an evil, evil man. RJ Harvey, unfortunately, again, committee work. But again, hey, we were just talking about it. Just hold on tight there. J.K. Dobbins injury history. We don't know. RJ Harvey could be lead back in like 2 weeks. You never know. And then the Bengals, we broke down everything in terms of concern there. Volatility is going to happen. The defense is bad, though, so it's going to be pass volume. Concern, though, is that pass volume going to get to Chase Brown? I don't know. Got some worries there, but that wraps things up, guys. I appreciate you joining in. Make sure that you've got your alerts on. You see all the news coming in and injuries and reports and this and that. Make sure your alerts are on with Bleacher Report because we're in fantasy season and all the drama is coming. And I will be here with you every single week, every single Monday with fantasy advice to help you win your league as well. You can find me across all social media platforms at It's Terra Time. Again, have a fantastic week. If you have any lineups that are open this week for these Monday night games, good luck. I hope you win. I will talk to you again next week.